If a company displays any of these red flags during a job interview, you need to get out of there. Even if you see a yellow flag, that is a terrible sign because these people are on their best behavior in this situation, so anything they do that's a yellow flag is going to get a lot worse if you take a job there. Now, I've got a list of the 12 biggest red flags to look out for so that you don't end up in a toxic work environment. And luckily for you, and unfortunately for me, I have a personal story of an interview process that I went through that contained all 12 of those red flags in a single day. So let me walk you through what to look out for while also telling you about the worst interview experience I ever had. And by the way, I know I'm not the only one who's gone through horrific interview experiences, so please, if you're willing, I would really appreciate if you told us a bit about some bad things that had happened to you in a job interview down in the comments, just so everyone's not feeling alone in their experiences. So in my experience, yes, someone did fall asleep while interviewing me. I'll tell you all about that in just a moment. But before I do that, I just want to cover why this is so important. If I had not noticed all these red flags that were taking place while I was going through this interview, I very well could have accepted a job at a toxic workplace and end up very unhappy in the work that I was doing. So this is important. We need to realize our worth. Just because we need a job doesn't mean we need to take any job. But if people aren't treating us well during the job interview, this is a sign to stay away. So without further ado, let me tell you about this fateful day where I learned a very valuable lesson. So I was about to finish grad school, and as a Canadian, I was having trouble finding a work visa, and this employer who invited me for the interview was one of the few employers that said they could give me a work visa, so the stakes were very high. They had invited me in for a 7-hour full day of interviews with maybe 7, 8, or 9 different groups of people, which brings me to red flag number 1. Too many rounds of interviews. If an employer wants to have 4, 5, 6 rounds of interviews with you, this is a good sign to you that it is going to be very hard to move anything forward as a part of this company, as it seems to take dozens of people just to make a decision. This is not a conducive work environment to being productive and getting things done, so this is a red flag to possibly stay away. Now, when I arrived at the location for this interview, there was no one there to greet me. And when I eventually found a receptionist, they did not know I was coming in for an interview. And when they told the hiring manager that I had arrived, the hiring manager made me wait for another 20 minutes before they would even come and talk to me. Which brings me to red flag number 2. If they make you wait, when you are a new person, kind of the guest of honor on interview day, it is a very strong sign that they are not going to value your time once you're an employee there. Another reason to maybe stay away. So once I was greeted by the hiring manager and a couple of other people, they took me to a very awkward breakfast interview. But when we got to the area where we were supposed to be having breakfast, there was no breakfast ready, so they had to find someone to go make some food. And then, as I got some food and started to eat, I realized that none of them had got food. They all told me that they had already eaten. So I'm sitting there eating all alone at this table while they're just grilling me with interview questions. This is very outside the norm for a breakfast interview. Usually you're just chatting casually before you get into a real interview. But they were grilling me while I was trying to peel a grapefruit with my bare hands. It was super awkward. After the breakfast, they had scheduled me to go on a tour of their facility, but they had forgot to schedule a tour guide. So I waited around for quite a while, and eventually someone came and gave me a tour. These are both signs, both the breakfast and the tour, of red flag number 3, which is a disorganized group of people. If they are disorganized on an important day, like interviewing a new candidate, it's very likely they're going to be disorganized all the time. So after the eventual tour, I went into my first big panel interview. And when I say big panel, I am not joking. They had 10 people come into the room to sit in on this interview with me. This is red flag number 4, giant panels. This is just an indication that they are very likely to invite you to a lot of unnecessary meetings at this company, and that they, again, are not valuing people's time or being efficient. Now, something that happens when someone is in an interview that they don't need to be a part of, maybe they zone out a little bit. And in this situation, one of the 10 people who was interviewing me decided to put his hood up over his head. And yes, he was wearing a hoodie, another little bit of a red flag to not dress up for an important day like an interview. And he put his hood up over his head and proceeded to fall asleep 4 feet away from me. Luckily, I was able to kind of ignore that and just continue entertaining the other 9 people in the interview. But holy wow, that is one of the wildest things I've ever seen in any professional situation. Definitely a red flag. After that weird interview, they took me to a lunch, and it was my would-be boss and a few of my would-be coworkers. Now, did they spend time at lunch getting to know me and telling me a bit more about what they do? Sure. But they spent most of the time trash-talking their other colleagues in other departments. I guess that was their way of giving me the lay of the land. It was super awkward and uncomfortable, which brings me to red flag number 6, gossip. If they are willing to gossip in front of you, a person they just met, they are 100% willing to gossip about you. So after lunch, I was invited to what's called a skip level interview, where I was being interviewed by the boss of my potential boss. And my would-be boss took me to introduce me to his boss. And he completely transformed from this confident, outgoing, gossipy person into the most sniveling little professional I've ever seen in my life. He was terrified of his boss. It was a drastic transformation of personality. Now, this is a huge red flag because consistency in how someone presents himself is very important in a leader. And also, there is clearly a strange dynamic between boss, employee, and so on throughout the levels. And that kind of dynamic is never going to be a comfortable place for you to work. Now, after that skip level meeting, I was brought into another panel interview with a bunch of people who I would probably be working with once every 6 months. So again, not a great use of people's time. But in that meeting, I found out I had a mutual connection with one of the interviewers. It was someone who I work with on a regular basis, and he claimed that this person was one of his best friends. And so I was super excited to hear that, and I asked if this person was going to be going to his best friend's birthday party on Saturday, at which point he revealed to me that they actually hadn't spoken in several years. That's a weird best friend dynamic. And that brings me to red flag number 8. If they lie to you, it is just probably not a great place to be, especially if you catch them in the lie. So I went through a few other meetings that day, and the final sort of interview was a 45-minute one-on-one sit-down with the hiring manager, my potential boss. And in this meeting, he committed most of the earlier red flags that I talked about, and 4 others that I'm going to tell you about right now. So first, he asked me some weird trick questions, like what would I do if I was a pencil stuck in a blender? These are not relevant and just kind of meant to throw you off a little bit. He made passive-aggressive comments about his staff or other people he had worked with, not really giving them the respect that they deserve as coworkers. He demonstrated poor communication skills, even describing to me that his feedback style was like a bull in a china shop and that he enjoyed calling people out and not giving them a chance to defend themselves. And finally, red flag number 12, he was just plain mean. He was a bit mean to me when I told him that I was job searching at other places. Of course I was about to graduate from school. And also he was mean about how his team had been underperforming me. So believe it or not, my friends, regardless of all that going down, I still walked away from that interview experience wanting them to like me and hoping they would offer me a job. And sure enough, the next morning, I got a call and I had somehow impressed them enough that they did want to offer me the job right away. So I asked them for a day to think about it. Then I spent some time truly reflecting on the experience. I spoke to a couple of managers. I relayed the story that I just told to you with a bunch of other details. And ultimately, even though I had no other offers on the table and my student visa was about to expire, I made the decision to say no because there's no way I would have been happy in that situation. So here is exactly how I said no. Thank you so much for the offer. It was great to get to know you and the team. Unfortunately, I'm gonna have to decline on moving forward with this position. The key was I kept it short, professional, and I definitely did not tell them why I was saying no because that certainly would have burned quite a few bridges. So that was story time with Greg. I hope you learned something. I hope you picked up on the red flags that we need to be looking for when we're interviewing for a job. And mostly, I hope you feel empowered during interview processes to know that you are also making a decision. You have to find a place that works for you, and we can't just accept every single job offer that comes our way. Now, if you found this valuable, you want to prepare to nail your other job interviews, you want to build a resume that's going to get you a ton of interviews, I would highly recommend and encourage you to check out all my other videos here on YouTube. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any of my great job search content coming out here every week on YouTube.